Happy Friday! Chapter 19 The Inventing Room, Everlasting Gobstoppers, and Hair Toffee. When Mr. Wonka shouted stop the boat, the Oompa Loompas jammed their oars into the river and backed water furiously. The boat stopped. The Oompa Loompas guided the boat alongside the red door, and on the door it said, Inventing Room, Private, Keep Out. Mr. Wonka took a key from his pocket, leaned over the side of the boat and put the key into the keyhole. This is the most important room in the entire factory, he said. All my most secret new inventions are cooking and simmering in here. Old Ficklegrubber would give his front teeth to be allowed inside just for 3 minutes, so would Prodnose and Slugworth and all the other rotten chocolate makers. But now, listen to me. I want no messing about when you go in, no touching, no meddling, and no tasting. Is this agreed? Yes, yes, the children cried. We won't touch a thing. Up to now, Mr. Wonka said, nobody else, not even an Oompa Loompa, has ever been allowed in here. He opened the door and stepped out of the boat into the room. The 4 children and their parents all scrambled after him. Don't touch, shouted Mr. Wonka, and don't knock anything over. Charlie Bucket stared around the gigantic room in which he now found himself. The place was like a witch's kitchen. All about him, black metal pots were boiling and bubbling on huge stoves, and kettles were hissing and pans were sizzling, and strange iron machines were clanking and spluttering, and there were pipes running all over the ceilings and walls, and the whole place was filled with smoke and steam and delicious rich smells. Mr. Wonka himself had suddenly become even more excited than usual, and anybody could see that this was the room that he loved best of all. He was hopping about amongst the saucepans and the machines like a child among his Christmas presents, not knowing which thing to look at first. He lifted the lid from a huge pot and took a sniff, then he rushed over and dipped a finger into a barrel of sticky yellow stuff and had a taste. Then he skipped across to one of the machines and turned half a dozen knobs this way and that way, and then he peered anxiously through the glass door of the gigantic oven, rubbing his hands and cacking with delight at what he saw inside. Then he ran over to another machine, a small shiny affair that kept going foot, 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 and every time it went foot, a large green marble popped out of it into a basket on the floor. At least it looked like a marble. Everlasting gobstoppers, cried Mr. Wonka proudly. They're completely new, and I'm inventing them for all the children who are given very little pocket money. You can put an everlasting gobstopper in your mouth, and you can suck it and suck it and suck it and suck it and suck it, and it will never get smaller. It's like gum, cried Violet Beauregarde. It's not like gum, Mr. Wonka said. Gum is for the chewing, and if you try chewing one of these gobstoppers, you break your teeth off. And they never ever get smaller. They never disappear. Never. At least I don't think they do. There's one of them being tested this very moment in the testing room next door. An Oompa Loompa is sucking it. He's been sucking on it now for nearly a year without ever stopping, and it's still going just as good as ever. Now over here, Mr. Wonka went on, skipping excitedly across the room to the opposite wall. Over here, I'm inventing a new line of toffee. He stopped beside a large saucepan. The saucepan was full of thick, gooey, purplish treacle, boiling and bubbling. By standing on his toes, little Charlie could see just what's inside. That's hair toffee, cried Mr. Wonka. You eat just one tiny bit of that, and in exactly half an hour, a brand new, luscious, thick, silky, beautiful crop of hair will start growing out of your head, and a moustache and a beard. A beard? Cried Veruca. Who wants a beard, for heaven's sake? It would suit you very well, said Mr. Wonka, but unfortunately the mixture's not quite right yet. I got it too strong. It works too well. I tried it on a Oompa Loompa yesterday in the testing room, and immediately a huge black beard started shooting out of his chin, and the beard grew so fast that he soon was trailing all over the floor on a thick, hairy carpet. It was going faster than we could cut it, and in the end, we had to use a lawnmower to keep it in check. But I'll get the mixture right just soon, and when I do, then there'll be no excuse for little boys and girls going about with little bald heads. But Mr. Wonka, said Mike TV, little boys and girls never do go about. My dear, don't argue. Please don't argue, cried Mr. Wonka. It's such a waste of precious time. Now over here, if you will all step this way, I will show you something that I am terrifically proud of. Oh, do be careful, don't knock anything over, stand back. Chapter 20. The Great Gun Machine. Mr. Wonka led the party over to a gigantic machine that stood in the very centre of the inventing room. It was a mountain of gleaming metal that towered high above the children and parents. Out of the very top of it there sprouted hundreds and hundreds of thin glass tubes, and the small glass tubes all curved downwards and came together in a bunch and hung suspended over an enormous round tub as big as a bath. Here we go, cried Mr. Wonka as he pressed 3 different buttons on the side of the machine. A second later, a mighty rumbling sound came from inside it, and the whole machine began to shake most frighteningly, and steam began hissing out all over it, and suddenly the watchers noticed that ruddy stuff was pouring down the insides of all these hundreds of little glass tubes, and squirting out into the great bathtub below. And in every single tube, the runny stuff was a different colour, so that all the colours of the rainbows, and many more as well, came sloshing and splashing into the tub. It was a lovely sight, and when the tub was nearly full, Mr. Wonka pressed another button, and immediately the runny stuff disappeared, and a whizzing, whirring noise took its place, and the giant whizzer started whizzing around inside the enormous tub, mixing up all the different coloured liquids like an ice cream soda. Eventually, the mixture began to froth. It became frothier and frothier until it turned from blue to white to green to brown to yellow, and then back to blue again. "Watch," said Mr. Wonka. Click went the machine, and the whizzer stopped whizzing. And now there came a sort of sucking noise, and very quickly all of the blue frothy mixture in the huge basin was sucked back into the stomach of the machine. Then there was a moment's silence. Then a few little rumbles were heard, and silence again. Then suddenly the machine let out a monstrous mighty groan, and at that same moment a tiny drawer, no bigger than the drawer in a slot machine, popped out of the side of the machine, and in the drawer there lay something so small and thin and grey that everyone thought it must be a mistake. The thing looked like a tiny little strip of grey cardboard. The parents and their children stared at the little grey strip lying in the drawer. "You mean that's all?" said Mike TV, disgusted. "That's all," answered Mr. Wonka, gazing proudly at the result. "Don't you know what it is?" There was a pause, and then suddenly Violet, the silly gum-chewing girl, let out a yell of excitement. "By gum, it's gum!" she shrieked. "It's a stick of chewing gum." "Right you are," said Mr. Wonka, slapping Violet hard on the back. "It's a stick of gum in the most amazing and fabulous and sensational gum in all of the world." Chapter 21. Goodbye, Violet. "This gum," Mr. Wonka went on, "is my latest, my greatest, my most fascinating invention. It's a chewing gum meal. It's that little tiny strip of gum lying there is a whole three-course dinner by itself." "What sort of nonsense is this?" asked one of the fathers. "My dear sir," cried Mr. Wonka, "when I start selling this gum in the shops, it will change everything. It will be the end of all kitchens and cookings. There will be no more shopping to do, no more buying of meat and groceries. There will be no knives and no forks at meal times, no plates, no washing up, no rubbish, no mess, just a little strip of Wonka's magic chewing gum. And that's all you'll ever need for breakfast, lunch and supper. This piece of gum I've just made happens to be tomato soup, roast beef and blueberry pie, but you can have almost anything you want." "What do you mean it's tomato soup, roast beef and blueberry pie?" asked Violet. "Well, if you were to start chewing it," said Mr. Wonka, "then that is exactly what you would get on the menu." It's absolutely amazing. You could actually feel the food going down your throat and into your tummy, and you can taste it perfectly, and it fills you up, it satisfies you, it's terrific. "Well, that's utterly impossible," said Veruca Salt. "Just as long as it's gum," shouted Violet. "Just as so long as it's a piece of gum that I can chew, then that's for me." And quickly she took out her own world record piece of chewing gum and stuck it behind her left ear. "Come on, Mr. Wonka, hand it over, this magic gum of yours, and we'll be seeing if the thing works." "Now, Violet," said her mother, "don't do anything silly." "I want the gum," said Violet. "What's so silly?" "I would rather you didn't take it," Mr. Wonka told her gently. "You see, I haven't got it quite right yet. There are still one or two things." "Oh, to blazes with that," said Violet, and suddenly, before Mr. Wonka could stop her, she shot out a fat hand and grabbed the stick of gum out of the little drawer and popped it into her mouth. At once, a huge, well-trained jaw started chewing away on it, like little pairs of tongs. "Don't," said Mr. Wonka. "Fabulous," shouted Violet. "It's tomato soup. It's hot and creamy and delicious. I can feel it running down my throat." "Stop," said Mr. Wonka. "The gum isn't ready. It's not right." "Of course it's right," said Violet. "It's working beautifully. Oh my, what lovely soup this is." "Spit it out," said Mr. Wonka. "It's changing," shouted Violet, chewing and grinning at the same time. "The second course is coming. Oh, it's roast beef. It's so tender and juicy. Oh, by what a flavour. This baked potato is marvellous. It's got a crispy skin and it's filled with butter inside." "But how interesting, Violet. You clever girl." Keep chewing, Violet," said her father. "This is a great day for our family. Our little girl is the first person in the world to have a chewing gum meal." Everybody was watching Violet, as she stood there chewing this extraordinary gum. Little Charlie Bucket was staring at her, absolutely spellbound, and watching her huge rubbery lips as they pressed and unpressed with the chewing, and Grandpa Joe stood behind him, gaping at the girl. Mr. Wonka was wringing his head, saying, "No, no, no, this isn't right for eating, it's not right, you mustn't do it." Blueberry pie and cream," shouted Violet. "Here it comes. Oh, it's perfect, it's beautiful, it's exactly as though I'm swallowing it. It's as though I'm chewing and swallowing a great big spoonful of the most marvellous blueberry pie in the world." "Good heavens, girl," shrieked her mother. "What's happening to your nose?" "Oh, be quiet, mother, and let me finish. It's turning blue," she shouted. "Your nose is turning as blue as a blueberry." "Your mother's right," shouted her father. "Your whole nose has gone purple." "What do you mean?" said Violet, still chewing. "Your cheeks," she screamed. "They're turning blue as well, so's your chin. In fact, your whole face is turning blue." "Spit that gum out," ordered her father. Mercy save us, screamed her mother. The girl is going to blue and purple all over. Even your hair is changing colour, Violet. You're turning violet, Violet. That's what's happening to you. I did tell you I haven't got it quite right, sighed Mr. Wonka, shaking his head sadly. I'll say you haven't, cried her mother. Just look at this poor girl now. Everybody was staring at Violet, and what a terrible, peculiar sight she was. Her face and hands and legs and neck, in fact, all the skin on her body, as well as her great big mop of curly hair, had all turned a brilliant purplish blue, the colour of blueberry juice. It always goes wrong when we come to the dessert, cried Mr. Wonka. It's a blueberry pie that does it, but one day I'll get it right. Just you wait and see. Violet, screamed her mother, you're swelling up. I feel sick, said Violet. You're swelling up, shouted her mother again. I feel most peculiar. I'm not surprised, said her father. Good heavens, girl, you're blowing up like a balloon. Like a blueberry, said Mr. Wonka, with a little smile across his face. Call a doctor, shouted her father. Prick her with a pin, said one of the other fathers. Save her, cried Mrs. Beauregard, wringing her hands. But there was no saving her now. Her body was swelling up and changing shape at such a rate that within a minute it had turned into nothing less than, in fact, a round blue ball. A gigantic blueberry, in fact, and all that remained of Violet Beauregard was a tiny pair of legs and a tiny pair of arms sticking out of the great round fruit, and a little head perched on top. It always happens like this. I've tried it 20 times in the testing room on 20 Oompa Loompas, and every single one of them is finished up as a blueberry. It's most annoying. I just can't understand why, said Mr. Wonka. But I don't want a blueberry for a daughter, said Mrs. Beauregard. Put her back to what she was this instant. Mr. Wonka clicked his fingers, and 10 Oompa Loompas appeared immediately at his side. Roll this little girl into the boat, he said to them. Take her along to the juicing room at once. The juicing room, cried her mother. What are they going to do to her? Squeeze her, said Mr. Wonka. We've got to squeeze all the juice out of her immediately. After that, we'll just have to see how she comes out. But don't worry, my dear. We'll get her repaired. It's the last thing we do. I'm very sorry. I really, really am. Already, the 10 Oompa Loompas were rolling the enormous blueberry across the floor out of the inventing room and towards the door that led to the chocolate river where the boat was waiting. Mr. and Mrs. Beauregard hurried after them. The rest of the party, including little Charlie Bucket and Grandpa Joe, stood absolutely still and watched them go. Listen, whispered Charlie. Listen, Grandpa. The Oompa Loompas in the boat outside, they're starting to sing. The voices, 100 of them singing together, came loud and clear into the room. Dear friends, we surely all agree there's almost nothing worse to see than some repulsive little bum who's always chewing gum. It's very near as bad as those who sit around and pick their nose, so please believe us when we say that chewing gum will never pay. This sticky habit's bound to send this chewer to a sticking end. Did any of you ever know a person called Miss Bigelow? This dreadful woman saw no wrong in chewing all day long. She chewed while bathing in the tub. She chewed while dancing at her club. She chewed in church and on the bus. It really was quite ridiculous. And when she couldn't find her gum, she chewed up the liminal or anything that was near, a pair of boots the postman's ear, or other people's underclothes, and at once she chewed her boyfriend's nose. She went on chewing till at last her chewing muscles grew so fast that from her face her giant chin stuck out just like a violin. For years and years she chewed away, consuming 50 bits a day, until one summer's eve at last a horrid business came to pass. Mrs. Bigelow went late to bed. For half an hour she lay in bed, chewing and chewing all the while, some like great clockwork crocodile, until at last she put her gum away upon a special little tray, and settled back and went to sleep. She managed this by counting sheep, but now, how strange, although she slept, those massive jaws of hers still kept on chewing through the night, even with nothing there to bite. They were, you see, in such a groove, they positively had to move. And very grim it was to hear, in pitchy darkness loud and clear, the sleeping woman's great big trap opening and shutting, snap, snap, snap. Faster, faster, chop, chop, chop. The noise went on, it wouldn't stop, until at last her jaws decided to pause and open extra wide. And with this, the most tremendous chew, they bit the lady's tongue in two. Thereafter, just from chewing gum, Miss Bigelow was always dumb and spent her life shut up in some disgusting sanitarium. And this is why we'll try so hard to save Miss Violet Beauregard from suffering an equal fate. She's still quite young, it's not too late. Provided survives the cure. We hope she does, we can't be sure.